Hello, family. Enjoy this relaxing moment with Surly Tales. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The city of Ikoma buzzed with life, its streets alive with the chatter of traders and the rhythmic beats of drummers performing under the shade of ancient baobab trees. In the heart of this vibrant West African city stood Starlight Academy, a sprawling campus of brick and marble that symbolized privilege and prestige. The school's gates, gilded and towering, guarded a world reserved for the elite, the children of senators, business moguls, and foreign diplomats. Among the students, none shone, or rather loomed, more prominently than Nandi Edom. At 16, Nandi carried herself with the air of royalty. Her uniform, tailored to perfection, stood out against the sea of standard-issue blazers. Her hair, always immaculately styled, and the faint whiff of imported perfume that accompanied her presence, made her impossible to ignore. She didn't just walk through the school's corridors, she owned them. Her high-heeled shoes clacked with purpose, an audible warning to anyone in her path. Students pressed themselves against lockers, and teachers looked away, pretending to be engrossed in their lesson plans. Nandi reveled in this fear. To her, it was a badge of honor. Her father, Senator Edom, was one of the wealthiest and most influential men in the region. Known for his ability to sway elections and silence critics, his shadow loomed large over Ikoma. The senator's influence extended into Starlight Academy's administration, ensuring that Nandi's missteps were either ignored or quickly buried. This privilege emboldened her, turning her into a force that neither rules nor reason could constrain. That morning, as the sun climbed higher into the sky, Nandi strutted into the school's central courtyard, her entourage trailing behind her. Each member of her group, a carefully curated collection of equally privileged girls, hung on her every word, laughing at her jokes and echoing her disdain for anyone she deemed unworthy. Near the edge of the courtyard, under the shade of a neem tree, sat Adamma and Akin, fraternal twins whose presence at Starlight was an anomaly. Both were scholarship students, their education funded by a local non-profit organization dedicated to uplifting underprivileged youth. Their mother, a widow, worked tirelessly as a street vendor, selling akra and plantain chips to make ends meet. Unlike the other students, who flaunted their wealth in every stitch of their clothing and every device they carried, Adamma and Akin kept to themselves. Their uniforms, though clean, were visibly worn, and their school supplies were hand-me-downs donated by well-meaning patrons. They were outliers in a world of excess, and their quiet demeanor made them easy targets. Nandi's sharp eyes zeroed in on them as she crossed the courtyard. She stopped abruptly, causing her entourage to halt as well. "Look at them," Nandi said, her voice dripping with mockery. "Sitting there like they belong here." The group erupted into laughter, the sound ringing through the courtyard. Adamma glanced up briefly, her large, expressive eyes meeting Nandi's for a fleeting moment before she quickly looked away. Akin stiffened beside her, his jaw tightening. "Let's go," Adamma whispered, tugging at her brother's arm. She had learned long ago that avoiding confrontation was the best way to survive in Nandi's world. But Nandi wasn't done. "Hey, scholarship boy," she called out, her voice carrying over the chatter of the courtyard. "Did your mother sell an extra batch of plantains to pay for those shoes?" The laughter grew louder. Akin's face flushed, but he said nothing. Adamma's grip on his arm tightened, a silent plea to let it go. Nandi's smirk deepened as she sauntered closer. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you're just too busy figuring out how to fix that raggedy uniform." The crowd that had gathered around them chuckled nervously, their laughter tinged with discomfort. They knew better than to intervene. Adamma stood abruptly, her slender frame trembling as she faced Nandi. "We're not bothering you," she said softly, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Please leave us alone." Nandi raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Oh, you've got some spirit, don't you? That's cute. But let me make one thing clear," she said, stepping closer until she was inches away from Adamma. "This school? It's mine. People like you? You're just visitors. Don't forget that. Satisfied with the silence that followed, Nandi turned on her heel and walked away, her entourage trailing behind her like obedient shadows. The crowd dispersed, leaving Adamma and Akin alone under the neem tree. Adamma sank back onto the bench, her hands shaking as she tried to hold back tears. Akin placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his own anger simmering beneath the surface. He wanted to confront Nandi, to defend his sister, but he knew the cost. Standing up to Nandi wasn't just an act of defiance, it was a declaration of war. "We'll get through this," Akin said quietly, more to himself than to Adamma. "We always do." But as the day wore on, the twins couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Nandi wasn't the type to let things go, and deep down, they both knew that their quiet lives at Starlight Academy were about to change forever. The following day dawned heavy with the humid air of Ikoma. The clouds hung low, threatening rain, but the city bustled on as usual. Starlight Academy, with its manicured lawns and glistening marble halls, seemed untouched by the weather. Inside, however, tensions brewed like the storm clouds above. Adamma and Akin arrived at school early, as always, their modest appearance in stark contrast to the luxury around them. Adamma clutched her favorite book, a dog-eared copy of Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. It was her escape, her refuge from the harsh realities of her life at school. "Stay close today," Akin said as they walked toward their classroom. His tone was firm, his protective instincts heightened after the previous day's confrontation. Adamma nodded, offering him a small, reassuring smile. "I'll be fine." But Akin wasn't convinced. He had seen the way Nandi looked at them yesterday, her eyes gleaming with a mix of amusement and malice. He knew she wasn't done with them yet. The classroom was noisy when they arrived, students chattering as they waited for their teacher. Adamma took her usual seat at the back of the room, while Akin sat a few rows away, close enough to keep an eye on her. The room was abuzz with gossip, who wore what, whose parents bought the newest car, and other trivial matters that dominated the lives of their wealthy peers. Nandi arrived late as usual, her entourage following her like satellites orbiting a star. The room quieted as she entered, her presence commanding attention. She walked to her seat in the middle of the room but didn't sit down. Instead, her sharp eyes scanned the room until they landed on Adamma. A wicked grin spread across her face. Well, she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "If it isn't our resident charity case?" Adamma froze. Her fingers tightened around her book, and she kept her gaze fixed on the desk in front of her, willing herself to disappear. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Nandi said, walking over to Adamma's desk. The other students watched silently, their expressions a mix of curiosity and fear. No one dared to intervene. Akin shifted in his seat, his body tense as he watched the scene unfold. He clenched his fists, willing himself to stay calm. "Reading again?" Nandi sneered, snatching the book from Adamma's hands. "What's this?" She held up the book, turning it over in her hands. "Things Fall Apart? How fitting. Just like your life." The room erupted in nervous laughter. Nandi's entourage chuckled loudly, eager to please her. "Please give it back," Adamma said softly, her voice trembling. She reached out for the book, but Nandi pulled it away. "Please give it back," Nandi mocked, mimicking Adamma's voice. "Or what? What are you going to do, scholarship girl?" Akin could no longer stay silent. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "That's enough, Nandi," he said, his voice steady but laced with anger. Nandi turned to face him, her eyebrows raised in mock surprise. "Oh look, the knight in shining armor is here to save his damsel." The room grew even quieter, the tension palpable. Akin stepped forward, his fists still clenched at his sides. "Leave her alone." "And if I don't?" Nandi taunted, her grin widening. She dropped the book onto Adamma's desk but didn't step back. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a pair of silver scissors. Adamma's eyes widened in fear as Nandi twirled the scissors in her hand. "You know," Nandi said, tilting her head as if in thought, "your hair is such a mess. Maybe I should do you a favor and cut it for you." The room collectively held its breath. Adamma instinctively raised her hands to her head, her fingers trembling. Akin took another step forward. "Don't you dare," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Nandi smirked. "Or what? You'll hit me? Go ahead, try it. Let's see how far that gets you." Without warning, Nandi grabbed a fistful of Adamma's hair and yanked her head back. Adamma let out a small cry of pain, tears welling up in her eyes. "Stop it!" Akin shouted, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. He grabbed Nandi's wrist, forcing her to let go of Adamma's hair. In the scuffle, the scissors clattered to the floor. The classroom erupted into chaos. Nandi's entourage shrieked in outrage, while the other students looked on, frozen in shock. Akin stepped in front of Adamma, shielding her from Nandi. "You'll regret that," Nandi spat, her face twisted in anger. She lunged for the scissors, but Akin was quicker. He kicked them across the floor, out of her reach. At that moment, the door swung open, and Mrs. Obiagelu, their literature teacher, walked in. She froze, taking in the scene, Nandi's furious expression, Akin's protective stance, and Adamma cowering behind her brother. "What is going on here?" Mrs. Obiagelu demanded. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Despite the witnesses and Adamma's tearful account, the school administration sided with Nandi. Senator Edam's influence was too great to ignore. Akin was labeled as the aggressor and expelled for endangering a fellow student. Adamma was left behind, forced to endure Nandi's wrath alone. That evening at home, Akin sat silently as their mother wept. She had sacrificed so much to send them to Starlight Academy, and now her son's future seemed uncertain. "I'm sorry, Mama," Akin said quietly. "I had to protect her." Their mother wiped her tears and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know," she said. "You did the right thing. But this world isn't fair, my son. You have to be careful." Akin nodded, but his heart burned with anger and frustration. He had stood up for what was right, yet he was the one paying the price. As he looked at his sister, who sat quietly in the corner, her head bowed in shame, he made a silent promise to himself. No matter what, he would find a way to protect her. But deep down, he knew the battle was far from over. The gates of Starlight Academy, once a symbol of opportunity for Akin, now felt like the iron bars of a prison as he walked out with his head held high but his heart heavy. His mother, Amara, was waiting outside, her eyes rimmed red with worry. Adamma trailed behind, clutching her torn book and trying to hide the fresh humiliation etched on her face. Inside the principal's office, Nandi sat smugly in her chair, her polished nails tapping rhythmically on the desk. The principal, Mr. Balagan, wiped his brow nervously, avoiding her gaze. Senator Edam's voice still echoed in his mind from the phone call earlier. "Handle this quietly. My daughter must not suffer any consequences." Akin's expulsion. At home that evening, the tension was palpable. Amara paced the small sitting room, her hands wringing the corner of her wrapper. Their 2-room apartment smelled faintly of the akra she had fried earlier in the day to sell at the market. Expelled, Amara whispered, her voice breaking. "After everything I've sacrificed, after all the sleepless nights? How could they do this to you, Akin?" Akin sat on a wooden stool by the window, staring out into the darkened street. He felt the weight of his mother's despair, but he couldn't find the words to comfort her. "They didn't even listen to you," she continued, her voice rising. "Didn't they see what she did to Adamma? That girl, she's evil. And her father," she trailed off, shaking her head. "The senator. He owns everything, doesn't he? Even justice?" Adamma sat quietly in the corner, tears streaming down her face. "It's my fault," she said in a small voice. "If I hadn't—" "No," Akin interrupted firmly, turning to her. "This isn't your fault. None of it is. Don't you ever think that?" Amara stopped pacing and sat down beside Adamma, pulling her into a hug. "Your brother is right. You didn't deserve any of this. None of yous did." But Akin's mind was elsewhere. His dreams of finishing school, going to university, and helping lift his family out of poverty felt like a distant memory now. Expulsion from Starlight Academy wasn't just a punishment, it was a sentence. No other school in the city would take him now, not after the influence of Senator Edam. Nandi's escalation. Back at Starlight, Nandi basked in her victory. With Akin gone, her dominance felt absolute. Adamma became her new target, a silent reminder to anyone who dared defy her. Nandi's cruel taunts grew bolder, her actions more vindictive. Fetch my books, she commanded one afternoon, lounging in her chair as the other students watched uncomfortably. Oh, and while you're at it, maybe shine my shoes too. I hear poor people are good at that. Adamma complied, her hands trembling as she picked up Nandi's textbooks. The other students averted their eyes, their silence complicit. They had seen what happened to Akin, and none of them wanted to be next. Mrs. Obiagelu, the literature teacher, noticed the tension in her classroom but said nothing. She had seen too many teachers fired for challenging the system. Starlight Academy wasn't a place for justice, it was a playground for the powerful. Akin's new path. Meanwhile, Akin's life took a new direction. Unable to return to school, he joined his uncle's mechanic shop in a bustling part of Ikoma. The shop was small and cluttered, with the smell of engine oil and the sound of clinking tools filling the air. Uncle Chijioke, a wiry man with kind eyes and grease-stained hands, welcomed Akin with open arms. You'll learn fast, he said, clapping a hand on Akin's shoulder. You've got good hands and a sharp mind. We'll make a mechanic out of you yet? At first, Akin struggled to adjust. The work was grueling and the pay was modest, but it gave him a sense of purpose. Each day, he woke before dawn to help his uncle fix cars, his calloused hands a testament to his growing skill. Though his dreams of higher education seemed distant, he found solace in the thought of providing for his family. But no matter how busy he kept himself, Akin couldn't shake the worry for Adamma. She had grown quieter since his expulsion, her once bright eyes now dull with fear and shame. A glimmer of hope. One evening, as Akin and his uncle closed up the shop, a sleek black SUV pulled into the lot. The driver, a middle-aged man in a crisp agbada, stepped out and approached them. Who's the young man? The man asked, nodding toward Akin. My nephew, Chijioke replied proudly. He's my apprentice. A hard worker. The man smiled. I'm Chief Okafor. I own a chain of auto dealerships across the state. I need a reliable mechanic for one of my garages. Would you be interested? Akin's eyes widened in surprise. Me, sir? Yes, you, Chief Okafor said with a nod. You've got the right attitude. And I hear you're sharp. Come by my office tomorrow, and we'll talk. For the first time in weeks, Akin felt a spark of hope. Perhaps his path wasn't as bleak as it had seemed. The system fights back. While Akin began rebuilding his life, the cracks in Starlight Academy's system grew deeper. Mr. Bell, a new teacher who had recently joined the school, quickly realized something was amiss. He saw the fear in his students' eyes, the way they tiptoed around Nandi, and the subtle but undeniable power dynamics at play. One day, during a routine test, Mr. Bell unknowingly read out the lowest scores in the class. When he reached Nandi's name, the room fell silent. 12%, he announced, glancing up. Nandi Edam. The students exchanged nervous glances, and a few stifled giggles escaped. Nandi froze, her face darkening with rage. After class, she confronted him. Do you know who I am? She hissed, her voice low but dangerous. I know exactly who you are, Mr. Bell replied calmly. And it doesn't excuse you from accountability. But Nandi wasn't used to being challenged, and she wasn't about to start tolerating it now. That evening, she began planning her revenge. The fragile balance of power at Starlight Academy was beginning to unravel. Akin's absence left a void, but his spirit lingered, quietly inspiring those who had witnessed his courage. And as Nandi plotted her next move, she had no idea that her own actions would soon lead to the collapse of everything she held dear. The morning sun cast long shadows across the gleaming halls of Starlight Academy, but inside the walls of the prestigious school, tension buzzed like a live wire. Rumors swirled of a new teacher who had dared to challenge the untouchable Nandi Edam. For most students, the thought was thrilling but terrifying. Nandi had silenced students and teachers alike before. This time wouldn't be any different, or so they thought. Mr. Bell's unintentional offense. Mr. Bell, fresh out of teacher training and full of idealism, had been assigned to teach history at Starlight Academy. Unlike his colleagues, he wasn't from a wealthy background, nor did he have powerful connections. He had earned his position purely on merit, and he believed in fairness and discipline. During a test review in class, Mr. Bell had made what seemed like a harmless mistake. As he read out the scores, he unintentionally announced Nandy's failing grade, 12%, in front of the class. The reaction was immediate and electric. A few students chuckled nervously, trying to mask their amusement, while others froze in fear, their eyes darting toward Nandy. Her face burned with humiliation. Never in her life had someone exposed her in such a public way. The embarrassment cut deeper because she knew the truth. Her grades were often quietly adjusted by the school administration under her father's orders. But this time, there was no hiding. Nandy's revenge. By the end of the school day, Nandy's humiliation had boiled into rage. She cornered her entourage during lunch, her voice low but seething. "That teacher thinks he can embarrass me? Let's see how he likes it when the tables are turned." Her plan came together quickly. That evening, she ordered one of her lackeys to bring a large bucket of green paint from the art department. The next morning, before Mr. Bell's first class, she instructed a few students to create a diversion, ensuring that everyone in the classroom would have their phones ready to record what was about to happen. The incident. The class was unusually quiet as Mr. Bell walked in, his briefcase in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. He greeted the students warmly, unaware of the storm brewing. "Good morning, class. Let's pick up where we left." The words died on his lips as Nandy strolled in, the bucket of paint balanced confidently in her hands. She didn't rush, she didn't hide. Instead, she stood in front of the class, staring him down. "Nandy, what are you doing?" Mr. Bell asked, his tone calm but wary. "What I should have done yesterday," she replied coldly. Then, with one swift motion, she tipped the bucket forward. Thick, green paint poured over Mr. Bell's head, drenching his hair, face, and clothes. Gasps and muffled laughter rippled through the classroom as students whipped out their phones to capture the spectacle. The paint dripped onto the floor, pooling around his shoes as he stood frozen in shock. "Maybe next time, you'll think twice before humiliating me," Nandy said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. She turned to the class, flashing a triumphant smile. "Consider this a lesson." The video goes viral. By the end of the day, the video was everywhere. It spread like wildfire on social media, first among the students of Starlight Academy and then far beyond. The hashtags #NandyEdom and #StarlightScandal began trending across the country. Comments poured in. "This is what unchecked privilege looks like. How is this girl still in school? If her father is like this, imagine the kind of leaders we have." The backlash was swift and brutal. Journalists began digging into Nandy's past, unearthing stories of her bullying and the school administration's complicity. Parents of other students voiced their outrage, demanding to know why their children were being subjected to such a toxic environment. The senator's desperate cover-up. Senator Edom, a man used to controlling narratives, quickly realized the gravity of the situation. That evening, he summoned the school's principal and Mr. Bell to his office. "This is just a misunderstanding," the senator said smoothly, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. "My daughter acted out of character. She's a good girl. Surely, we can resolve this without unnecessary attention." Mr. Bell, still reeling from the incident, refused to be placated. "With all due respect, sir, your daughter humiliated me in front of my students. This isn't just about me, it's about the culture of fear she's created at that school." The senator's smile faded. He leaned forward, his tone turning icy. "You're a smart man, Mr. Bell. I'm offering you a way out. Take this," he said, sliding an envelope across the desk, "and resign quietly. Otherwise, I can make sure you never work in this city again." Mr. Bell hesitated but ultimately pushed the envelope away. "I'm not for sale," he said firmly. Public outcry. Unbeknownst to the senator, Mr. Bell had secretly recorded their conversation. Days later, he released the audio to the press, adding fuel to the already raging fire. The public, already incensed by the video of Nandy's actions, erupted in anger at the senator's brazen attempt to silence the scandal. The headlines were relentless. Power and privilege, senator's daughter caught in viral bullying scandal. Audio leak exposes senator's attempted bribery. When will justice be served at Starlight Academy? Protests began outside Starlight Academy, parents demanding accountability and the immediate expulsion of Nandi. The school's board of directors, facing mounting pressure, finally suspended her indefinitely. But for many, that wasn't enough. The tides turn. As the scandal unfolded, Nandi's world began to crumble. Her once loyal entourage distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with her tarnished reputation. Strangers heckled her in public, and her social media accounts were flooded with angry messages. Even Senator Edom, who had always protected her, started to falter. His political rivals seized the opportunity to criticize his character, questioning whether a man who couldn't control his own daughter should hold office. For the first time in her life, Nandi was truly alone. Akin watches from afar. Meanwhile, Akin followed the story with a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Working late at his uncle's mechanic shop, he saw the news on a small television mounted in the corner. "She's finally getting what she deserves," Uncle Chijioke muttered, wiping his hands on a rag. Akin nodded but didn't respond. Deep down, he knew that while Nandi's downfall was a step toward justice, it wouldn't erase the pain she had caused, especially to his sister. He turned back to his work, tightening a bolt on a customer's car. He had a promise to keep, to protect Adamma and rebuild their family's future, no matter what it took. But as the fallout from the scandal continued, Akin couldn't help but wonder if the powerful would truly face the consequences, or if this, too, would eventually be swept under the rug. The scandal that erupted from Starlight Academy did not fizzle out like many others involving the rich and powerful. It had grown into a national movement, a mirror reflecting the deep-seated inequalities and corruption in the system. While some stories faded, Nandi's case only gained momentum. It became a symbol of unchecked privilege, injustice, and the consequences of power gone awry. The courtroom drama. A few weeks after the viral video and the leaked audio of Senator Edom's bribery attempt, Nandi was summoned to court. Her father, once a towering figure of political authority, looked frail and tired as he accompanied her into the packed courtroom. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with anticipation. The case was not just about the incident with Mr. Bell, it had snowballed into a reckoning for the systemic abuse of power that Nandi and her father represented. Witnesses came forward to recount stories of her bullying, manipulation, and cruelty at Starlight Academy. Teachers who had remained silent for years spoke about the pressure they faced to overlook her actions. Students, emboldened by the public support, shared harrowing tales of their encounters with her. Nandi, once the queen of Starlight Academy, sat pale and silent in the defendant's chair. The smug confidence she once wore like armor was gone. For the first time, she looked small, her eyes darting nervously across the courtroom. When Mr. Bell took the stand, his voice trembled as he recounted the humiliation he endured. "It wasn't just about the paint," he said, pausing to collect himself. "It was about the message she sent, that she could do anything, and no one could stop her." The senator's lawyers argued that Nandi's actions were a result of immaturity, that she deserved leniency as a minor. But the prosecution painted a different picture. Nandi's behavior was a product of a toxic environment that rewarded arrogance and cruelty, perpetuated by her father's influence. The verdict. After weeks of deliberation, the jury reached a decision. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the sentence. "Nandi Edom, you are hereby sentenced to 2 years in juvenile detention, followed by 2 years of community service." This court hopes that this serves as a lesson that no one is above accountability, regardless of their social or economic status. Nandi let out a strangled cry, turning to her father for comfort. But Senator Edom, his career in shambles and his reputation destroyed, could barely look at her. His political allies had abandoned him, and his once unshakable influence had crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. As officers escorted Nandi out of the courtroom, she glanced back one last time, her tear-streaked face a mix of fear and regret. Her father stood motionless, his expression unreadable. A new beginning for Akin and Adamma. While Nandi faced the consequences of her actions, life began to change for Akin and Adamma. The exposure of the injustices at Starlight Academy brought unexpected opportunities for the twins. A local foundation, inspired by their resilience, offered Adamma a scholarship to a new school, one that promised a supportive environment free from intimidation. For Akin, life at his uncle's mechanic shop flourished. The story of his courage had reached Chief Okafor, who offered him an apprenticeship at one of his prestigious auto garages. "You've shown the kind of character we need in this world," Chief Okafor had said. "I want to invest in your future." Akin threw himself into his work, learning everything he could. Over time, he began designing new tools and methods for repairs, impressing not only his mentors but also himself. His hands, once bruised and battered from his first days at the shop, now carried the skill and confidence of someone shaping his destiny. At home, their mother, Amara, watched her children with pride. She no longer had to juggle two jobs, as Akin's contributions and Adamma's scholarship eased the family's financial burdens. Their once strained dinners were now filled with laughter and hope. Starlight Academy's reckoning. Starlight Academy also felt the ripples of the scandal. The principal, Mr. Balagan, resigned in disgrace after it was revealed that he had repeatedly covered up Nandi's behavior. A new administration was brought in, one committed to rebuilding trust and prioritizing the welfare of students over political alliances. For the first time in years, the school halls felt lighter, the oppressive shadow of privilege lifting. Students like Adamma, who had once walked with their heads down, began to thrive in the absence of fear. A message to the nation. The fall of Nandi and Senator Edom became more than just a cautionary tale. It sparked a broader conversation about accountability and privilege in Ikoma. Activists used the case to push for reforms in education, ensuring that no student would have to endure the kind of injustice Akin and Adamma faced. Mr. Bell, now a prominent voice in the movement, spoke at rallies and on television, urging others to stand against corruption. "This isn't just about one girl," he said during a televised interview. "It's about a system that allows power to shield wrongdoers. We must hold ourselves and our leaders to higher standards." The legacy of courage. Years later, Akin stood outside his newly opened auto repair shop, the sign above the door gleaming in the sunlight, Adamma Auto Works, named in honor of his sister. Adamma, now a university student studying to become a teacher, visited him often, bringing her books and laughter to the bustling workshop. One afternoon, as Akin tightened a bolt on a customer's car, Adamma handed him a copy of Things Fall Apart. "You remember this?" she asked with a smile. Akin chuckled, wiping grease from his hands. "How could I forget? It's what started everything." Adamma's smile faded slightly. "Do you regret it? Standing up to Nandi?" He paused, looking at her with the quiet confidence he had gained over the years. "No," he said firmly. "I'd do it again. Some things are worth fighting for." As they stood together, watching the city bustle around them, it was clear that while the scars of the past remained, they had turned their pain into strength. In a world still grappling with inequality and injustice, Akin and Adamma were proof that resilience and courage could light the way forward. And in the distance, the towering gates of Starlight Academy stood as a reminder that no one, not even the powerful, was above accountability. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.